sometimes makes it a little bit difficult to make hard decisions, but at the same time, you have that heart, that empathy for that person, so you understand. Anyone else who'd like to share something that they got out of that time?
I'll just say again, sorry, I think this is no one else at the moment, but it gives me a better idea of what to pray for my brothers and sisters here.
Yeah, absolutely. And was this hands up if this was the sort of like the first time you've heard their story about their walk with Jesus? Like, yeah, a lot of you. And the follow-up question to that is, how long have you known each other? And this is the first time that you've had this question.
First time I've been on church camp in several years. That's several. Is two several?
No, that's three.
That's a few.
It's been a couple of years. Yeah. So if we haven't even, I'm saying we as a church family, if we haven't heard each other's stories, what does it tell us about how we tell others about Jesus? Because if we're not even telling each other people that we know about who God is and what God has done in our lives, how do we tell others that? Yeah, and I think this is something that I'm trying to do at Kingsford, and I think this might be something that the pastors and the elders are wanting to do at Hurstville as well, is to help you be comfortable in telling your story. Like so my story, telling telling my stories and some of the heartache and the bits and pieces in my life. I've told this story a number of times now, that it's made it a little bit easier for me to be able to tell people that I don't have kids and I did go through burnout. Whereas perhaps when it first happened or when I was younger, I would actually shy away from saying things like that. And part of that would be my Asian cultural background of that would bring shame to the family, for example. It's not something you would do because you don't necessarily show your weaknesses or show that vulnerable side of you. And yet I think the older I get, the more I see that God actually uses those moments in our lives to encourage others, to help other people grow in their faith. So it's one of those things that I hope becomes not only formative for you, but also just an everyday thing that as you meet each other, at church or even outside, but let's just say you meet each other only weekly. Then one of the questions I would probably want to ask is, instead of just saying the usual, "Oh, hi, how are you?" It might be something like, how is not only how was your week, but how has God blessed you this week? And just hear what the story that comes back from that might be. Because it not only takes people out of the normal, "How are you? I'm fine, thanks," and "How are you?" to actually cause people to stop and think, "Oh, actually, how was my week?" Was it a good week? Was it a bad week? It doesn't matter. It's like God was in it, but there are going to be weeks that are going to be harder than others. So if that becomes the natural language in your church family, then it spills over into all areas of your life, doesn't it? It's not just you practice it. I guess you use the church time as the practice time, the rehearsal to feel comfortable in telling your story, so that when it comes time to meeting your colleagues at work or just friends, and then it becomes a little bit easier to ask the questions of not only just "How are you?" but you might even ask, "No, so how are you really?" And you're able to go into some of those deeper details. Right. The second session I thought I'd put down is is to ask the question, well, who is Hurstville Church of Christ? What's the identity of Hurstville Church of Christ? Simon Sinek, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's a guy on the internet, but he talks a pretty good game. He's actually got a book out, and his book is titled Start with the Why. Why do we do what we do? Why does Hurstville do what it does? Why does Kingsford Church exist? What's the whole thing? What's the whole purpose of that? I didn't make this up. This was part of Kingsford Church language for a number of years before I came. And this is just the motto that they use, is to know Christ and to make him known. That drives the whole agenda at Kingsford Church. We want you to know Christ and we want you to make him known. And then out of that spills all these other questions. Well, how do we know Jesus? Okay, you read your Bible, you pray, you be part of a fellowship, and you do, okay. So how do we make him known? Oh, that's a little bit harder, maybe, or it's we share the good news. Okay, how do you share the good news? How do you tell the story? And all that first session was to help you be more relaxed in telling your story. When I was working in the corporate life, we did a whole full day of working on how to do your public speaking and presentation. When it came to talking about work stuff, I got a bit of the nerves and did all that kind of stuff. And yet, when it came to telling my own story, or make up a story of something that's happened, I became much more animated. So at the time, I think the story was around, tell us a story about how you relax, something like that. And I used the example of cooking, for example. And I used the literal movements that I would use at home to tell that story. So I go over here and grab some salt and some pepper, and I'll go over here and chop things up, and then I'm cooking over here. And so I've had all this animation, and yet when I talked about work stuff, it was like, like everything's stuck. I couldn't get any words out. To know Christ and to make him known. Is there a motto? Is there a saying? Is there something at Hurstville that drives Hurstville Church? And again, this is something I've come into this time here today, deliberately not looking at the Hurstville Church of Christ website, deliberately not asking the pastors, what's the mission, what's the vision, all of that kind of stuff, because I'm actually wanting to go, okay, let's see what happens. let's see what you come up with. So, in Andy Stanley's book, he Deep and Wide, he writes these things that in his American vernacular. He would say, marry your mission, date your model, not date a model, date your model. The framework, or this is how we do it here. That's the model. He also says, fall in love with your vision, and stay mildly infatuated with your approach. And the whole point of that is to say, okay, what drives what you do? Why do you do what you do? As a church at Kingsford, we certainly have things that we do internally, like we've got our music and the AV team, and do all that kind of stuff internally. That just runs the Sunday worship experience. And yet what we do, the two major external ministries, I suppose, that we have is one that's run out of our children's ministry, primarily annually, our Southern Cross Kids Camp, where we take kids away who are not necessarily Christians, who are doing it tough, and who may have been referred to us, whether through the department or through the principal. Their home life is not necessarily the best. Take them away for a week, and let them be kids. And the whole point of that is to say that we want to be, the saying that we use is, we want to be Jesus with skin on to these children. We want them to know Jesus just through fun, through activities, through just sitting with them, listening to them. That drives this, to know. We want them to know Christ and to make him known through our actions. The other thing that we do is our community dinners. It's called Table at 399. 399 because that's the address of the church, 399 Anzac Parade. And we do, and that's the whole thing, is we want them to know who Jesus is, not only through us serving them with food, but then using that as opportunities to hear their stories, to encourage them, to pray for them. And 8 years in, we're only now starting to get some traction out of that. It's taken 8 years to build up the trust, that those people trust us as a church, that these people who come from social housing and the like don't have a lot going for them, and yet they come along every fortnight for the dinners because they find a sense of community out of that. And so that drives what we do. So, what's Hurstville's? What's Hurstville? What's your saying? What's your motto? What's your mission? Does anyone know it?
I probably can't repeat it all, but to be a presence in this city.
To be
A faithful presence, that's right.
to be a faithful presence in this city. That others will follow. Okay.
Can't we just shorten it to Jesus? That's all it needs to be. He's the answer.
Follow Jesus. Yeah.
I've got another one
Yep.
that I've made up myself. We're a group of dysfunctional people trying to make sense of life through Jesus Christ our Lord.
So, having that out there, what's of most importance to Hurstville? Like, I'm just asking a question. I don't know what the answer is. What is of most importance to Hurstville Church of Christ? That drives what you do in the midst of not just gathering on a Sunday, but everything that happens.
The doctrine is good. I say it's a good church because they have me as a member.
Yeah.
While we don't focus entirely on the Chinese, there is a significant Chinese population in Hurstville, and that has been one of our aims is to make Christ known amongst that population.
Yeah.
Basically, we want to share the love of Jesus with our community.
Okay.
And I think our vision,
I think it basically, for me, it's to do that, to travel on your own journey with Christ, and it's only that way before we can go that way. So to go outwards. So the two should be going ahead at the same time.
Yeah.
In our community.
Yeah. Thank you. Jez?
I think that the vision statement sort of helps to clarify what it looks like, because it talks about all of us worshipping God and being good neighbours and maturing in faith. So yeah, I think that hopefully helps to then put the guardrails around all the other things that we do.
Yeah.
Or we want to do new things that are really
Yeah.
needing that and offering the fresh hope as well.
Yeah. So a question that I've asked my leaders, and something that's been on my mind for a while, and I'll ask you here. When was the last time you invited someone? When was the last time you invited someone to Hurstville Church of Christ?
Invited and they didn't come, or invited? I've invited people, but they haven't come.
Yeah, just ask. Like, when was the last time that's happened?
Well, I practically invite somebody every week.
Yeah.
I do ask my neighbours, whenever I talk to them,
Yeah.
is he going to church? I said, why don't you come around?
Yeah.
Well, every time I say, come, you'll find, but they don't come. I've had people come, but
Yeah.
if they don't come, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
But I do like throwing up invitations.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask the leaders, the elders. When was the last time you invited someone to Hurstville Church of Christ?
I'm sorry to say, I can't remember.
You can't remember? Yeah. Last week? Is it regular though, that you ask someone?
There's opportunity.
Yeah. If the opportunity arises, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So I've asked this question to my leadership team, ministry leaders and the like, and I asked them that question. The question arose because there's been a concern over the last number of years that the congregation has been in decline numerically, and I asked so I asked that question. Well, so when was the last time you invited someone? And there was crickets. It was really silent. And then there were a couple who spoke up that actually says, I wouldn't actually invite anyone to Kingsford. That's a bit of a stab in the heart and the back. And it's like, okay, well, so what do you mean by that? Well, yeah, and there are some there are reasons for it, but the follow-up question to that was, well, so what would you do differently so that you could, so that you would invite someone? What would you do differently? Like, how could we do this differently so that Kingsford would be a place where people would want to come, or where it'd be the done thing to invite someone along? Because everyone we've had, every new person that has come to Kingsford, have all commented how warm and friendly the church is, and how inviting they are, and in meeting new people. And yet, you ask the leaders, and they haven't invited anyone in years. So as the pastor, I go, well, so is that, if we believe in the ministry of all believers, does that mean that it falls on the pastor to invite everyone, or is it actually everyone's job to do that? And again, it was silence. And so as a leader, I go, well, what's the problem? What's the issue? Is it that we don't know this? I say this every week. It's up on our board all the time. Is it because they're not strong in their faith? They've been part of the Kingsford Church fabric for at least 20, 30, some even 40 or 50 years have been part of Kingsford Church. They've grown up there, they came to Christ there, they were baptised there. Everything happened at Kingsford, and yet something's happened. Is it because maybe our lives are just too busy? We don't invite anyone. My excuse when I was younger was, well, I went to an Indonesian church and it was in Randwick, and I lived in Bankstown, so it was very hard to bring them along, and I used that as an excuse. I wanted to bring them along, but I was like, oh, it's a bit too far for them, and I just made up excuses for other people. Whereas really, it was myself not inviting them along, or doing something differently. So, So then the questions continue for me is like, well, so who is in my circle of friends? Who is in their circle of friends? Is it all Christians? Is it all from the same group of people that they know? Do they have any friends at work? Are they Christians, non-Christians? Is it not the thing to talk about? Are they part of a club or something like that? So for the last few years, I've been I've been on a pretty rigorous fitness journey, and I've joined a fitness studio just down, like literally a block away, and it's been on my heart to not only to pray for them, but to try and build friendships and connections with these people, because I see them, I probably see them more than I do people at church, because I'm at the gym 4 days a week. I see them at their worst and in their struggles and trying to do burpees and push-ups and things like that, and yet you see then you have opportunities to connect with them, and so in the first couple of years I was able to connect with a couple of the trainers and to pray for them and to encourage them and to do all of that. I don't know where that I don't know where that will take them, but it's a start. And I don't know about you, but I've been part of church life long enough to feel the pressure of trying to win them to Christ, to get them from the time that they give their life to before Christ, all the way to they give their life to Christ, to disciple them through that, as if I need to seal the deal to go, okay, God, this is what I've done for you, and here are all the people that have been led by me, and da da da. And yet I actually think that we all have our bits to play, that we're in a sense a link in a chain, that our role could be that we have a friend who might be sick, and all you do is you go over and you bring them food, you spend half an hour with them, sit with them, and that's it. You may not have an opportunity to share Jesus with them at that particular moment, but you might be invited back to spend more time with them, and then you have opportunities open up. It may be just one of those passing moments. So a number of years ago, before Kingsford Church, a Pakistani man came into our church and saying, "Hey, is this church?" Yes, come in. Shared a sermon, and at the end of it, he goes, "How do I give my life? I want to be a Christ follower. How do I give my life to Jesus?" And on my behalf, I could have said, "Wow, that was the best sermon I preached, and they came to Christ," and all that kind of stuff. But it wasn't. It was absolutely nothing to do with me. I just happened to be at the end of that process where he received Jesus. His backstory was 18 months earlier, he was standing at Rockdale Station on a Sunday morning. Someone knocked him over the head. He fell down, unconscious, wound up in hospital for 3 or 4 days, and the person in the bed next to him gave him a Bible. That's it. That's all that person ever did, was just give him a Bible. Hey, read this. That started him on an 18-month journey of working out who is this God. He knew about God. He knew about Allah through the Quran, because he was a Muslim, and yet his first question to me is, should I become Roman Catholic or Greek Orthodox? So that, and it's because in Rockdale there was a huge there was an influence of a Greek Orthodox church on one side and a Roman Catholic church on the other. That's all he knew. So that's why he asked me that question, and so that was further conversations around, okay, what do you mean? And so he gave his life to Christ. We journeyed with him for 12 months or so and helped him through all of this process, and now that he's moved away and he's doing something else, and I'm doing something else, and yet so I don't know where he's ended up, because I haven't stayed connected with him. But that was my role in his faith journey, was to be at the end to go, do you receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? Yes. Woohoo! I feel like that was a win for me, but it wasn't me. That was all God's doing. So perhaps in our roles as people of Hurstville Church, that might be something that we're doing. Is we're just laying the foundations. We're just laying the seed. in, I think, is it 1 Corinthians? 1 Corinthians 3, chapter 3, verse 5, it says, Paul the Apostle talks about a few things, and he says, Paul planted the seed and Apollos watered it, but it's God who gives the growth. So what's our role in all this? Are we the ones giving the growth? Are we the ones trying to force someone to become a Christian? No, we're either planting a seed or watering it. We're trying to point people to Jesus. That's our role. That's what we do. And so, if I was to ask this question again, what is of most importance to Hurstville Church of Christ? Could you name those one or two things? Is that clear to you? What is of most importance? What's the non-negotiable in all of this? Because we know, as church people, that some have either watered down the gospel message to the point where it really doesn't mean anything to anyone anymore, or it goes the total opposite direction, and it's like, this is the only way, and to the exclusion of all others, and like, well, so how do you get into this club? So what does that mean? And what does it mean for you as members, as people of Hurstville Church of Christ? So I've been on a journey trying to help articulate this, and we've come up to a point where our role, and this is incomplete, all right? But my hope is that we will equip you, empower you, encourage God's people, that's you, into God's unique missional calling. And what I mean by that is, this is probably more for me as the pastor than it is makes sense for the church, or makes sense for the leaders, is that if we are all the ministry of all believers, if we all believe that, which is part of the Churches of Christ history, and it's not just the pastors, it's not just the deacons that does all the work. If we believe that, and if I'm to equip, part of my role is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So how do I help you? How do I encourage you? How do I empower you? How do I help you? And certainly today's time this morning was that small first step. Learn how to tell your story. Because as you learn how to tell your story, and the more you tell your story, the more refined it becomes. So I could tell you about my engagement story, how I got engaged to Dee, and it's been refined and refined and refined over the years. I can tell it like that, and the wow factor is this: we've been dating for a while, and so I'll try and tell it. So we've been dating for a while, and I thought, okay, I'd love to propose to her. So I booked, for those who know, I booked the Summit restaurant in the city. It's a revolving restaurant. And I booked it on Australia Day. And just as it came to 9 p.m. at night, or just before that, I asked the question, Dee, will you marry me? She says yes. The fireworks go off in the background. So that's how I've refined the story, and that's the shortened version. The longer version is, Dee, will you marry me? And there's I swear there was a pause of at least 2 minutes where she said nothing at all. I go, oh, have I done this? Have I said the right thing or not? She eventually did say yes, and the fireworks did go off. So, but as I tell that story, I go, hey, that's I got the government to pay for fireworks for my engagement. So I've refined my story that well because I've told it over and over and over again. And as we learn to tell our own stories, we'll find those unique points where we are actually pointing people to Jesus. So that's what I'm trying to do at Kingsford. The next bit is before I started at church to live the kingdom way. Beautiful, love it. We intend to reach out, accept and connect young people with the good news of Christ and transform the lives of young people to help them develop their identity in Christ. Priority 3, connecting with the community. We intend to share the love of Christ with our local community in a relevant and practical way that meets them where they are at. So all of that was driven out of to know Christ and to make him known. Out of these 3 things, have we identified, equipped and empowered and released current and future leaders from our church to live the kingdom way? The answer would be not really. As much as we've focused on that, as much as I focus on that, part of the problem is we don't have any future leaders. The church is, average age is probably in their mid-50s. There's a handful in their 40s and 30s. A lot of the children who grew up in the church have left for one reason or another, way before I turned up. So I'm still trying to unpack what that means. But they've left Kingsford Church. They still have their faith. There's just not many around. But we're working on that, and we have to some extent doing that. But I'm doing that more on a congregational level than just on a leadership level. Is to live the kingdom way. Our youth and young adults, we intend to reach out, accept and connect young people with the good news of Christ. Yes, they did. So our youth group pre-COVID, out of all the kids that came, out of the 15 youth, so the high schoolers, all of them were not part of the church. All of them were part of the community. All of them didn't really know Jesus. Only one of them has given their life to Christ and accepted Jesus, and that was a very hard and long road with that person. Where is the group now? It's disappeared. Our youth leaders have moved on because of work and other things. So we don't have a youth and young adults because we don't have any youth and we don't have any young adults in church, and that's a problem. And part of it is coming back to the question, when was the last time we invited someone? And at some point in the Kingsford Church history, we've stopped inviting people. And I'm guilty of that as well, because I'm either focused on the day-to-day, the week stuff, or my sermon, and I forget to invite someone. And yet that's probably the primary thing I should be doing. And yet in part it has happened that we're showing them who they are in Christ. Connecting with the community. We intend to share the love of Christ with our local community in a relevant and practical way that meets them where they are at. And certainly through our table at 399, that is happening. Connecting with them on their level, connecting with them on a practical way, trying to help them. So let's take the next, I don't know if I have any more. Oh yeah. These values were again put together by the committee that was part of the Transformational Church, and they came up with this. We value Christ-centered relationships to build a caring community because God's word tells us that we are stronger together than we are apart. It's a value that I can live with. Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly. We value equipping and empowering people to live their lives fully and reach out to others for God. Again, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And then we value people experiencing God's grace through a personal relationship with Him. They're the three. They're the three things that values. And because of that, it drives what I do. It drives how sermons are preached. It drives every activity that happens in church. And certainly when I first turned up, we had so many ministries happening. It was hard to get my head around why we've got all of these things. And yet, over the last couple of years, we've scaled it back to go, what are the imperatives? What are the things that we actually really should be focusing on? Because they're all good things that we could do. The question is, should we be doing that? So if we were to take a pause and go into your groups, there are some questions that I'd like you to answer, and you may not be able to get through them all. The first one is, who is Hurstville Church of Christ? Can you say that in 10 seconds or less? Can everyone say that? Not only who, but why. Why does Hurstville Church of Christ exist? Why do you exist? What is its purpose? And then, looking at it with a somewhat critical eye, and go, are we doing that? Some other interesting questions or statements that I want you to finish off, and I haven't put it up, and it might be something for the leadership and as a church to explore further on, is questions like, well, what is to finish this sentence, my gifting or my strength or my experience is, and you fill in the gaps, or my personal vision is. And the personal vision one is an interesting one because I have one for myself, or I have one for my family, like for Dee and myself, is that we could have continued to be part of an Indonesian church. And yet what we knew for us was that we wanted to minister to more than just the Indonesian people. We wanted to be more English speaking and the like. But coming out of that was my personal vision is to see people's lives transformed. Like for those who were here last night, I used the word catalyst as my role in helping a person be transformed. Here's one for your church, is the opportunities for our church are. What are the opportunities at Hurstville Church? Look around you, look at for the leaders, you may have looked at the census data. What are the opportunities for your church? Couple more, I'll just share it, and you may not have time to answer this, but God's invitation to me is, finish that sentence, God's invitation to me is, and it could be, well, God's invitation to me is to be a loving husband, is to be the best neighbour I can be to those around me, is whatever it might be. And this is one we're trying to focus around using Hurstville Church as the vehicle for this, is I know what I can contribute to our future, or I can contribute to my future by whatever it is. So you don't have to answer any of those questions. I think the most important one is, well, who is Hurstville Church of Christ? Why do we exist? And how does your mission and vision statement play out in your church life? Could it mean that some of the things that you're doing now, you're doing it because it's a historical thing that you just continue to do, but it's not actually contributing to the vision and mission of the church? So that might be something you need to stop. Or there could be an opportunity that's happening in the Hurstville area that you sort of sense is happening, but because you haven't heard other people talk about it, you don't know. So let's go till about 12 o'clock. I think what time's lunch? 12:30. So let's go to 12 o'clock in your groups to talk about some of these things, and then we'll come back in that last half hour or so, just debrief and hear what's come out of that